childhood. Lots of things happened to me as a kid. And, I do want to say that everything that I talk about is just my experience. It's not what makes me an alcoholic, but it makes me uniquely qualified to help someone who's gone through a similar situation. Because for me, when I got here, I didn't think I had anything in common with you. I was young and I walked in and I'm like, what has my life come to? But I'll get into that. You know, I do have a home group. I have a sponsor. Her name is Georgette H. And I sponsor people in the program. And these things are super important for me to stay in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous because I've been around Alcoholics Anonymous and I've been in the middle, and there's definitely a difference, right? If you're in the middle, it's so much easier to hang on when that wheel of life is spinning, and we know that life gets lifey, it spins, but if you're in the middle, it's so much easier to hang on tight. And that's been my experience in 18 years. Life gets lifey, but I haven't had to drink or use that, because I've been given tools here in the program. So like I was saying, my parents were a mess. Lots of things happened, and I witnessed a lot of things, and I just always compared my parents to my friends' parents, and I thought like, oh, there is no God, because if there was a God, my mom would not be doing drugs, or she wouldn't be shoplifting, or she wouldn't be in jail, she wouldn't be in prison. My dad would not have left. Like I always compared my outsides to everyone else's, and the reality is like I never measured up, and I just felt like I always got the short end of the stick. And I grew up just resenting my family for who they were. I grew up resentful at my mom because she didn't love me enough. If she loved me, she wouldn't be out, being a junkie. And so my grandmother stepped in to raise me. She gave me unconditional love. She gave me stability. She gave me a house. She gave me every material possession that I could have ever wanted. And more importantly, she let me be me. And she was not judgmental of who I was, because you always hear alcoholics talk about, I felt very uncomfortable with my own skin, and yes, that was me, but I was also born a boy, so add another layer of shame, pain, and discomfort, a layer of shame that I carried with me through my adult life, and thank God for sponsorship and direction, because this almost took me out 8 years of sobriety, carrying shame. But like I said, thank God for good sponsorship and the work that we do in this program. So my grandmother, she just let me be me, and she gave me unconditional love. But that was short-lived because when I was 7 years old, my grandmother got arrested outside of my elementary school. And I learned that evening at 7 years old that my grandmother was working with the Mexican drug cartel. It was all over the news. It was all over the San Diego Union Tribune. I carried so much shame because I was embarrassed about who my parents were, and now I'm embarrassed about who my grandmother is. And I was that kid that got walked into the principal's office by two DEA agents. And it was so embarrassing. My family was plastered all over the news. It was the biggest drug bust in the late 80s, and I was just like, what is this, right? I had this idea of who this woman was, and all of a sudden it's like gone. So I felt like I couldn't trust people. And that for me started this journey of being shuffled around from house to house. And the message that I got is that I was not lovable, right? I was just like a lost puppy. I just wanted somebody to love me, because if you would love me enough, maybe I'd be okay. But because I'm being shuffled around from house to house, I'm not getting that attention, I'm not getting that love, and I'm blaming my mom for everything. So I went to go live with my mom, and she was like my big sister. That's how I saw her. And so I had to learn how to adjust to her lifestyle, and what that looked like was, helping her sell dime bags of heroin, helping her cross people across the border to support her drug habit, helping her shoplift. Like that was the life that I grew up in. And it's not, I didn't want that life. I grew up in so much fear because I never knew if we were going to get caught or not. And so I grew up a very scared child, and I vowed to be very different than my parents. I said, I am never going to use drugs, and I'm never going to drink alcohol, but I'm here now, so what does that tell you? God had a different plan. And thank God that I made it into the rooms. I'm glad that I'm an alcoholic. When I first got here, I was in my 20s, and I would hear people say, I'm so grateful to be an alcoholic. And I didn't understand what that meant. Today I understand it, and I am grateful to be an alcoholic in recovery, right? That I made it to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I did pretty good for the most part in school. I was getting pretty good grades. I was determined to be the first person in my family to go to college and get a degree. That was my ultimate goal. I wanted to be successful. And so I did pretty good for the most part. I got pretty good grades in school. I didn't really play a lot. I didn't really have a normal childhood. I grew up very, very fast. And I did pretty good for the most part until I got to my to high school, because when I got to high school, I started experimenting with some high-powered sedatives. And it was when I started doing that, it was like, I could breathe. I had a backbone, I had a voice, because I was that scared little kid that lived in fear. I no longer felt that when I was drinking and using. And I'm a blackout drinker. And then I'd come to and I'd hear about the terrible things that I've done. And people tell me, you turn into a monster. They're like, I wish we could record you so you could see the way that you act, because you're mean, you're violent, you're belligerent. And back then, we didn't have cell phones or cell phones with cameras. Thank God. There's no evidence. Yeah, got lucky. And then, by the time that I got to my senior year of high school, I was really excited because I had been admitted to 3 universities. And I was finally on my way to be successful, what I thought success looked like. But what happened is my mother caught a case at the border. She got caught crossing a large amount of methamphetamines, and she was sent to federal prison. And my sisters were going to go into foster care, and there was no way that I was going to allow that to happen. So I put college on hold. I got a job at the phone company, and I went before the judge, and I got custody of my 2 younger sisters. And I'm 18 years old, and I'm raising a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they didn't come with instructions. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I was determined to give them a better quality of life than the life that I had been given. But the problem is I'm an alcoholic, and I'm drinking, and I'm using, and I'm living this double life because I'm presenting pretty well, I have a pretty good job, I'm making good money. Behind closed doors, I'm drinking, and I'm drugging. And so I started taking these trips to psych wards, because when I come to and I hear about the terrible things that I do, I always want to kill myself. So I had multiple stays at the psych ward. I always wanted to kill myself. The last time that I tried to commit suicide, my sisters found me unconscious. And what happened the night before is my sister said, you know what, you're just like my mom. That stung. Except we don't visit you in jail, we visit you in hospitals. So I'm like, oh, I'm not worthy. So I went to the pantry, and I grabbed a big old bottle of Tylenol, a Costco size, and I drank it all. And when I came to, my sisters were driving me to Kaiser, to the emergency room, and when I got there, the doctor's like, they run some tests, they do what they have to do. They said, you're so lucky that you haven't died because your liver was starting to shut down. I was hospitalized for 7 days, and on the last day, he said, I'm gonna go ahead and discharge you, I think you're good. So I'm in my room, I'm packing my things, and these 2 EMTs walk in, and they ask for me by name. And here I go back to the psych ward because it was technically a suicide attempt. And I remember being driven from the hospital to the psych ward and being in an ambulance, and the EMT just put his hand on my hand. And there's a window in the ambulance, and I could see the sun just like shining in. He put his hand on my hand, he's like, it's all gonna be okay. I'm thinking like, is it? But I still remember that feeling. I felt warmth coming in through that window. And so I get to the psych ward, and the doctor was still there when I got there, and he's looking at my chart, he's flipping the pages, he's like, oh, welcome back. I see that you're a regular here. It was my 8th time there. Yeah. He said, you know what, I'm noticing that every time that you're here, it's drug and alcohol related. He said, I really want you to look around the room here. And if you've been to the psych ward, you know what I'm talking about. He said, the people that are here are heavily sedated. They have severe mental problems. But I think you might have a problem with drugs and alcohol. I don't think you have severe mental problems. He said, I'm gonna make a deal with you. I was like, all right, I like deals. If I lift your 5150, will you go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? I don't know why I said yes, but I did. And so he said, here's the number to central office. Call them when you get home. They'll direct you to a meeting. And so I'm packing my things, I get home, and I think about that conversation with the doctor. And being the people pleaser that I am, I said, I'm gonna follow through. I called central office, and they sent me to this meeting that was around the corner from where I lived. How convenient. It was this nooner, so I walked there, and when I walked in, everyone there looked like they were 100 years old. I'm like, what has my life come to? I don't know why I sat in the front seat, like right there, right in front of the speaker. We usually tend to sit in the back when we're new. But I don't know what prompted me to go sit in the front. And I don't remember anything that was said at that meeting. It was like, wah, 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 wah. But after the meeting, people held hands and prayed. I'm like, oh, this is creepy. And so after the people prayed out, I was gunning towards the door, and these two women stopped me, like, "Hey, welcome. How many days do you have?" I don't know. I had maybe like a week. They said, "We'd like to invite you to come have lunch with us." And I don't know why I said yes, but I did. And I got into this car with these two strange women, and they took me to have lunch. And this woman talked about having 5 years of sobriety. And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I could not imagine, like, not drinking or drugging for that long. And the other woman had double digits. She had like 20 years. I remember thinking, like, oh, what a loser. Like, what? Like I said, my goal in life was to make enough money that I could hire a bodyguard to take care of me when I'm out partying. That's not normal. Like, come on, it's not normal. That's insane. So that's when my journey into Alcoholics Anonymous really started. They invited me to come back the next day, and I did. I came back, and they suggested that I get a commitment, so I got a commitment. I think I was doing literature announcement. And then they told me that I should probably get a sponsor, so I got a sponsor. And I started taking direction. And they told me that I should get involved with this conference called Feeling Good. It was a roundup that happened every year around Labor Day. And I thought, sure, that sounds fun. And so I got very busy, I got very involved. And then I got to my fourth step. And when I'm on my fourth step, I'm seeing some really uncomfortable truths about myself that I didn't like. And I was like, ooh, this is scary, let's set this down. And so when I would come to meetings, people were asking me, how's your fourth step coming along? How's your fourth step coming along? I got so tired of people asking me how my fourth step was coming along because I wasn't doing it. So I stopped going to meetings. And I was living with this guy who had 9 years of sobriety, or 9 years dry, because he wasn't really going to meetings. And so on Memorial Day weekend of 2007, we thought it would be a great idea to buy a bottle of rum. And so we sat down, we thought it out. I played the tape. I know where my disease takes me. You know, my disease takes me to Mexico I come to with an AK-47 pointed at my head. I wake up in psych wards. I steal. I'm belligerent. I spit in your face. Like, that's the nasty, mean drunk that I am. And I thought about that, right? And I remember serving the glass. We had this bottle of rum delivered because we're going to be responsible. And I stared at the glass, and I'm playing the tape, just like you guys told me to. And I took that sip. And as soon as I took that first sip, it was like, a light went out inside of me. I had a head full of AA, belly full of booze. And let me tell you, this disease is progressive. I did the research. I graduated to doing other stuff, and my roommate had started doing other stuff. He was vacuuming like at 3 o'clock in the morning and bringing strange people home. And I'm like, oh, I sat him down. I'm like, Mo, we have to get you into rehab. Because now I can't sleep because I'm paranoid that he's going to do something shady. And so he agreed to go to rehab, and I was like, yes, it's going to be a great summer. I'm going to party, and I'm going to enjoy like my fun summer in San Diego. So I drove him to rehab, and he's like, you're going to get sober, right? And I said, I am. But I had no intention of getting sober. The party was just about to start. And so, I'd come to, and I'd hear about the terrible things that I did. By that time, we did have like cell phones with cameras, so that was kind of scary. But thank God there's nothing out there. And so I'd wake up with souvenirs. I'm a thief. Sometimes I wake up with some guy's jeans, some guy's driver's license, some keys, wallets. I steal from people, and I become everything that I don't like. I become like my mother. And he called me. He's like, hey, I'm getting out pretty soon. Are you sober? And I said, I am, but I wasn't. I was lying, I'm deep in my relapse, and I'm doing so many drugs, and I'm doing so many pills, and I'm coming to in weird places. I got LASIK in a blackout in Mexico. That's not normal. I went blind for 28 days. Like, it's like, it was crazy. Did I think I had a drinking problem? Maybe. Was I willing to take a look at it? I was not. So Mo came home from rehab, and he sat me down. He's like, you're not sober, right? I was like, I'm not. He's like, you need to get sober if you want to live here. I'm like, okay. So I'd go to a meeting. I introduce myself as a newcomer, and I'd get 2 days, and I'd relapse. I'd get 3 days relapse, 4 days relapse. I couldn't do it. And he told me, you have to move out. And I begged and I pleaded. I said, please, I have nowhere to go. He's like, well, if you go to treatment, you can stay. And what I heard is, you can go on a vacation. So I called my insurance, and I called the nicest place that they would pay for. It was in Los Angeles, in Pasadena. It looked really pretty online, had lots of greenery. So I called them and they did this assessment. They said, you should come check out the place. I'm like, great, I would love to. They're like, can you be here tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning? I was like, sure. So, I came to that day that most sat me down. I had come to with scratches on my face. I had just been kicked out of this bar that I frequented, and I was banned from it. And so I had scratches and bruises because I had gotten into a fight with this woman, and I didn't drink that night. So I actually went to tour the facility the next morning, and I was there in the morning, and my friend drove me. And I gave them my insurance card, I gave them my driver's license, and I said, can I get my tour now? They're like, sure. So they're giving me the tour, and it's beautiful. There's, lots of green trees, there's bungalows, there's a tennis court, and I'm like, okay. I see Dr. Drew walking around with Bob Forrest. I'm like, I think I can get into this. So I said, okay, I'll be back on Monday. They're like, you're not going anywhere. You're just going straight into detox. So they sent me to detox. I was like, I don't have any clothes. You'll be fine. I don't have a toothbrush. We have it. Everything you need here. That detox was so fuzzy. I don't remember much of it. But then they sent me to residential. And I was so pissed to be there. I did not want to be there. I wasn't doing any of the work. I was attending groups, but I was just doodling, writing letters, writing poems, writing songs. I wasn't willing to do any of the work. I'm surprised they didn't kick me out. But I made friends there. And so I would, me and my friend would do each other's hair. We'd do each other's, whatever. And she was going to get out before me. And she said, why don't you come stay with me here in LA? We can go to this outpatient program together. We'll go to AA meetings. And what I heard is you can extend your vacation. So I said yes. I completed the residential program. I went to stay with her. She lived in Toluca Lake. And I went to a meeting with her once maybe. And then I wasn't going to any other meetings. I was just unwilling to do anything. And I was touring Los Angeles because I'd never really explored it. And I was like, okay, this is fun. I was going to the gym every day. And eventually she got tired of me doing nothing and eating her food and sleeping on her couch. And she kicked me out. And we got into a huge fight. And I was like, all right, I'll show you, Patty. So I packed up my little Toyota Corolla and I drove to the bar. And this was October of 2007. And I remember thinking, maybe I should just wait till I get to San Diego to drink. I probably shouldn't drive drunk. And this was October of 2007. There were fires happening at Camp Pendleton. And I remember being in bumper-to-bumper traffic on the 5 South. And I remember just looking over to my left, and I saw these huge flames just burning, bushes burning. I literally had a burning bush moment on the 5 South. Today I know what that was. That was my higher power intervening in my life. I knew what I had to do. I went to a meeting, I got a sponsor, and I started attending every day, sometimes 2-3 meetings a day. I was on disability, so I had a lot of time. And I got busy with my step work, and I started seeing those really uncomfortable things that were scary. I started doing all that work. And my life got good. My life got good real fast, but for an alcoholic like me, when life gets good real fast, I'm in a dangerous place because I start resting on my laurels. And I have to have that awareness. Right? When life gets good, you have to continue doing the work. When life gets bad, you continue doing the work. Somebody told me, when you're walking through hell, just keep walking. Don't stop and take pictures. And I remember that. They told me that when I was new. So, like I said, my life got good real fast. I started making a lot of friends. I fell in love when I was 9 days sober. He had 14 years. He told me he was not going to date me. I was so upset. And one of my friends was going to UCSD, and he was taking a Spanish class, and he said, hey, will you tutor me in Spanish? I'm like, sure, I can help you. The thing is, when I got there, I was so broken that I didn't think that I had a chance of going back to school anymore. I thought that I had run my life into the ground, and I thought, I'm just too broken, I'm too fragile. And he planted the seed that maybe I can go back to school. And I would tutor him for his class, and then we'd go to a meeting and get dinner. And that was my life for a while. And so, I got some time, I got my year, and I had a huge celebration. And I started taking these classes, 3 units here, 3 units there, weekend classes. And then I walked into this meeting. I was about 1.5 years sober. And I met my higher power. He was about 6 foot. He had hazel eyes. He had curly hair. He had 90 days. He had just paroled. I was like, Just my type. And you guys said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" I'm like, "Yes, I want to do that because you know what? This guy gave me love, attention, validation that I wasn't getting anywhere else." And it didn't work out, you know, shocker. But he moved in with me after he got out of treatment, and we were in a full-on like relationship, toxic relationship. And then I get this letter from Cal Poly. They're like, "Dear Miss Alea, you have been admitted to attend, da da da." And I was like, "Oh, it's finally happening!" Like my dream of going to college and getting a degree. So I sat down with my boyfriend. I told him, like, "Listen, I just got accepted to this school. I'm really excited. I'm gonna move." And he's like, "You can't move. If you move, I'm gonna die." I was like, "Oh no, we don't want that to happen." I was like, "Okay, so do not want the love of my life to die." So I called Cal Poly and I was like, "Hey, is there any way I can come the following quarter and not this upcoming quarter?" They're like, "I'm so sorry, Miss Alea. If you don't come, you're gonna have to go through the whole readmission process again." And that was a risk that I was willing to take for love. 2 weeks later, he came home with track marks on his arms. He had relapsed. I thought, what did I just do? I had to go through the whole readmission process again. So I applied and, I got accepted again. So when I got accepted, I sat him down and I was like, "You know what, I'm gonna move. There's no ifs, ands, or buts." And he's like, "All right, we'll work it out." And we didn't work it out. He couldn't leave the county. He was on parole. Um, yeah, it was not a very healthy relationship. Today I understand why we don't date the newcomer. I learned the hard and painful way, right? It's a distraction. It's also painful for the other person. It was very, very painful for me. And, he recently passed away. He died 2 years ago of an overdose. And sad, how some of us make it and some people don't. So I'm at Cal Poly. I'm getting really busy. I'm determined to really get this degree, and I'm taking 18 units at the main campus and 3 units at the junior college because I want to hurry up and get out of there. I want to start my life. And I graduate. My program suffered a little bit. I didn't drink or use, but I was bedeviled, like they talk about on page 52. I was restless, irritable, discontent. I was having trouble in my personal relationships. I was depressed. I was irritable, and I got this internship at a fashion PR company in Los Angeles, so I moved to Los Angeles, and then I start dating, and I meet this guy, and he comes up to my apartment one night, and he sees a big book, and he's like, "Are you in AA?" I was like, "I am." He's like, "I am too." I was like, "Shit." I was like, "How long have you been sober?" He's like, "A year and a half." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And then he asked me, "What meetings do you go to?" And the thing is, I had just moved to Los Angeles, I had no foundation, I wasn't going to any meetings. So I said, "I'm not really going to meetings." He's like, "Oh, how's that working out for you?" I was like, He's like, "Well, I'm going to write down a few meetings. If you ever want to check them out, check them out." And he wrote down this Thursday Night Ohio Street, which is a young people's meeting. And he wrote down this meeting called Hollywood Young People's Meeting. So I walked into this Thursday Night Ohio Street one night, and it was like 200 young kids just running around, vaping and drinking Red Bulls. I'm like, what is this? This is not the AA that I'm used to. And it scared me, so I ran out of there after the meeting. And I said, "I am not getting involved in this young people stuff ever again. It's not for me. This is not how I was raised in AA." And so then I walked into this other meeting, the Hollywood Young Peoples, and everyone who was there, it was so chill. It was such a different vibe. Everyone welcomed me with open arms. And it was that fellowship that I had in San Diego, it was that familiar feeling. And they invited me to have dinner, and they invited me to be part of their home group. So I made that my home group for a while, and then they invited me to come to this business meeting, and I didn't know what I was walking into, but it was this business meeting called LACIPA, the Los Angeles County of Young People in AA. And I was like, okay, here are those young people again. Mind you, I was still kind of young. But I was being very judgy of them because they didn't do AA right, in my opinion. And so they said, "We've been bidding for this conference called WACIPA. It's the Western Area Conference of Young People in AA. LACIPA has been bidding for this conference for years. We've never had it in Los Angeles. And, we want to bid again." I'm like, "Great, let's go bid." So during this time, I'm doing a lot of amends. And I'm doing, get to the part with my mom that I just hated so much. I just was so resentful at her But through the work that we do in this program, I started opening the door. And when she would call me, I was just, the conversations would get longer, and she would email me from prison, and I'd email her back, and it started to feel not transactional anymore, right? Because she would call and say, hey, can you put money on my books? Or hey, can you, send me this or that? Or can you do me a favor? Everything felt very transactional. But because I was doing so much work and I got to see like my part, here's the thing, one of my biggest character defects is being cold and distant. If someone hurts me, like I just keep distance and I turn around and I pretend like you don't exist. It's one of my biggest character defects, being cold towards people. And so I've had to do a lot of work around that. So in my mind, my mom, I always considered that, she might be dead, And so when she would call me, it was just very transactional. But then I started to understand how punishing I've been towards her and how much lack of compassion I've had to her and her disease. And my sponsor pointed out, she said, would you treat a newcomer like this? I'm like, absolutely not. Like, what's the difference here? Oof. That was, when you see your part and it's so like black and white, it's like in your face. So on my birthday one year, I went up to visit her in federal prison and I made an amends to her. Because for once I got to see her with love, with compassion, and see her like the sick one of us that she is. And she was receptive to that. And I started to fall in love with this woman. And I started, our conversations were longer. And I started caring for her. Like I said, I fell in love with her. And she came out of prison in 2015, and she came out clean and sober. And I just, I was ready for the call that my mom was dead in alley with a needle in her arm. That's how I grew up thinking, like, just be ready for that call. And she came out clean and sober, and we started having this beautiful relationship. And I'd go visit her in San Diego, and we'd have those Christmases with matching pajamas and all that annoying stuff that we do with family. And it was wonderful. And so we go in, the committee, we go and we bid for Wacky Paul. We go bid in Sacramento, and I was really excited because I made the bid packet. So, I'm type 8, it was perfect. We had good hotel contracts, and we bid to their advisory council, and the conference got awarded to Edmonton, Canada. I was so resentful. I'm like, Edmonton, Canada? Who wants to go to Edmonton, Canada? They're like, come back and bid next year. And I was just like, I was pretty resentful and salty. So the following year, we decided as a committee that we're going to go bid again. So the three of us that could cross to Canada went to bid. It was freezing. It was like New Year's Eve time. And I was like, yeah, we're going to get it. We have such great hotel contracts. We have a really good bid package. We have a really solid committee. And the conference was awarded to Boise, Idaho. Like, shit. They're like, come back and bid next year. I'm like, I'm busy. And I threw a tantrum in front of advisory. It was so embarrassing because I was crying and I was mad, and I didn't even go to the decompression with them. I was just like, screw this. I'm going to move on to bigger and better things. I was in the middle of writing a book, and I was like, they're like, are you going to bid next year? I'm like, I'm busy. They're like, okay, whatever. They didn't care. So the following year, I'm starting to feel like, something needs to change. And I'm starting to do the work again. I got into the steps. I'm working with a new sponsor and really building a connection to my higher power, because I wasn't really connecting with my higher power. I heard this woman share at a meeting, and she had this calmness about her. She had this energy, and she just, she talked about emotional sobriety. She talked about shame, and shame was something that I could identify with because I had been carrying so much of it. And I called her the next day, and I asked her to be my sponsor, and she said, okay, if you want me to sponsor you, you're going to memorize my phone number and call me every day to check in. You're going to call central office and thank them every day for being of service. You're going to go to 6 meetings a week. You're getting commitment at 3 of those meetings. And you're going to call 5 women a day. I remember thinking, like, what an order? I can't go through with that. It just seemed like such a big ask, and I wasn't a newcomer per se. And I was like, she's like, you can do it or you cannot do it. I was like, okay, I'll do it. So I started doing all those things that she told me to do. And I started taking direction from her. If she said jump, I'd ask how high. And I did all those things until central office told me to stop calling because I was just plugging up the lines. And my life started getting bigger and better, right? Today I understand why we call people in the program, because when shit hits the fan, it's so much easier to pick up the phone because you're in the habit of doing so. Everyone in my life today is part of the program. Like the people that I hang out with. In 18 years, I've built an amazing network of people all over the country, all over, everywhere. Because I got very involved in young people's and I started going to conferences here and there, and the ICIPA, the ACIPA, the ECPA, the NDPA, everything. And so you start meeting people all over the country. And so, this woman took me through the 12 steps, and she also took me through the 12 traditions. And that's something that no one had ever done. My favorite tradition is tradition 7, being self-supporting, but not just financially, being self-supporting emotionally. Because I can't rely on you to provide me with happiness. It has to come from within and a connection to a higher power, which took me to prayer and meditation. Something I do every single morning when I wake up. I have to turn my day over because left to Emmy's devices, I run my life into the ground, even sober. So I hit my knees, I do my prayers, and I meditate every single morning, no matter what, even if I'm going to be late to work, right? And the result of that has been beautiful because I have a relationship with a higher power that I grew up just not believing in. And so my emotional sobriety is getting so much better. And so the committee's like, we should go bid in Boise, Idaho. And I was like, you know what, we should. And there's new blood, there's new people on the committee. And before we went to bid, I also got into this relationship. I met this guy in AA, and we got into a relationship, and it was a very healthy relationship because I was practicing what you guys taught me. I was practicing the principles of the program in all my affairs, right? You get to practice them at work, in your personal relationships, in your romantic relationships. The traditions are amazing, and I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to work them. So I have a healthy relationship. We move in together. We get a puppy. We get a second puppy. It's great. It's going good. The committee wants to bid for Wacky Paw again. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So I sat down the committee before we went to bid in Boise, and I was like, listen, guys, we're not going to get it. Just be prepared for that. But also enjoy the journey, because there's such beauty in bidding with your committee, and it's such an amazing, magical thing if you're in the right state of mind, if you're not being expectant like me. So we went to Boise, Idaho, and there were other committees bidding for this conference, and the conference got awarded to us, to Los Angeles. And I was like, oh, wow, you stay out of the results, right? You do the work and you stay out of the results. So I'm like, shoot, now the real work, because now we have to, fundraise for this conference to be able to hold a big conference in Los Angeles. And we got awarded the conference in January of 2019. And in February, I got elected to be the chair of the conference. And I was like, this is going to be such a great year. Oh, I feel it already, right? I was happy at home. I was happy. I had a really great paying job. My mom was good. Everything's good. And so in April, I found out that my partner was seeing someone else and living a double life, and I was heartbroken. I felt like my world just shattered in that moment. And I didn't want to drink, I didn't want to use, but I did want to kill myself. Thing is, I was the chair of a conference, so I couldn't kill myself because I had to show up and run business meetings. Ego sometimes comes in handy. So, I'd go and I'd run these business meetings, and then I'd come home and cry myself to sleep, and, only God knows why he puts us in the commitments that he puts us in, right? Commitments have always saved my life. And that's why we say yes to an AA request. And it took me a minute to understand that. So that happened in April. In July, I was going to go speak at an ASCII, a young people's conference in Arizona, and on a panel. And my grandfather passed away on July 3rd. And so I know that my mom, she was sober, but she wasn't really having a program of recovery, so I was worried about her. I was like, let me go show up for my mom. So I called my mom. I said, Mom, I'm gonna not go to Arizona. I'll come be with you. And she's like, no. She's like, you get on that flight and you go be of service in AA. I was like, who are you? So I did. I went to speak on that panel, and then I came back, and I went to be of service to my mom. We buried my grandfather, and that was painful. It was hard, and my mom. When my grandmother passed away, her mom, she was in prison, and she didn't get to have that. And I know that for her, that grieving process was so hard on her. So that I wanted to support her going through it with my grandfather, and so I showed up to be of service with her and support her, and then in November I got laid off from my job, a very well-paying job, and I was like, all right, God, what is this? Why is 2019 the year of loss? What's the message in this, right? So we hosted the conference in January of 2020 before the world shut down, and it was beautiful. It was so beautiful to just be able to see like everything that we had worked so hard on all year long, and all the pain that we went through to put on this amazing conference for 2,000 young people in Los Angeles. And I got elected to be on the advisory council, and I was excited, and I'm still involved in that. I have one more year left of being on advisory, and it's everything that I've learned in my to work professionally, I learned in AA, right? I learned how to work an Excel sheet in AA and in business meetings and all this stuff. Like everything that you guys have taught me, I've taken out there. And I do have an amazing quality of life. I do. It's not perfect. Lots of things still happen. Just because we get sober doesn't mean we're exempt from life's problems. But we have tools that if we choose to use can get us through anything, right? My sponsor said, we don't drink, we don't use, and we don't kill ourselves, no matter what. I was like, got it. And there's been a lot of no matter what's in 18 years. Last year, on Mother's Day, I got a text message from my nephew, and it was a picture of some drug paraphernalia, and he said, Grandma's using this. And again, my world shattered. Because drugs are so different today than they were 10 years ago when she was using. And my first thought is my mom is going to die. And I was embarrassed, I was resentful. We had just done this show together on our recovery, and I was resentful and embarrassed, but at the same time I was worried about her. And I was about to secretary this meeting on Zoom when I got that text message, so I was so frazzled. And I called my sponsor and I said, I told her exactly what was happening. She's like, Emmy, you're not allowed to ice your mother out of your life. I was like, okay. You're going to call her and you're going to tell her that you love her. And you work in treatment. You're going to tell her that that you have resources for her if she ever wants the help. I said, okay. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to just turn the other way and pretend like she wasn't there. But I had to follow direction. So I called her the next day and she answered and I said, Mom, I just want you to know that I love you no matter what. And I know what's going on over there. And if you ever want help, I have a lot of resources. And she said, she didn't deny it. She said, thank you. And, I told her I loved her again and we hung up. And, I check in with her sometimes, just checking for proof of life. I check her WhatsApp to see when she had last be seen on there. And then, eventually I got the call and she said, I'm ready. And so I called my friend. I'm like, oh my God, my mom's ready. We got to strike while the iron's hot, all this kind of thing. And she's like, done. Within a few hours, my mom was in an Uber on her way to Camarillo to go to a detox. My friend had scholarshiped her. And she did the detox, the residential program. And then she came here to Ventura to a sober living. And she started feeling lonely. She wanted to go back to San Diego. And I was like, okay. So she went back to San Diego and, she hasn't told me yet, but I know she's relapsed. And she's been missing since Christmas. And I have to, turn it over and pray for her. And we've been looking. My sister's looking for her. And we'll see what happens. I don't know, but Yeah, so that's been my latest in the last 48 hours that we can't find her, and I pray that she's okay, and I'm gonna do whatever I need to do. But like I said, AA has always shown up for me. It's given me an amazing quality of life. Life is full of like ups and downs, just like a roller coaster. But for me, AA is that harness that keeps me safe in that roller coaster of life. Thank you for letting me share.